Hey everyone, and welcome to the Monetize Your Expertise podcast. I'm your host, Grant Weherley, the online course guy helping you every week to monetize your expertise. Just go to myepodcast.com for tools and links and more for all episodes. Welcome back to the Monetize Your Expertise podcast. Today I'm here with Ben Krueger, who's founder of Cashflow Podcasting and is the master when it comes to growing your business with podcasting. Thanks for joining me today, Ben.
Hey, really pumped to be here, Grant. Thanks for having me on. This is going to be a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So you are the guy when it comes to podcasting, and so I'm sure you weren't always that person, that go-to person when it comes to podcasting. So what was your story like? What led you to really dive into and focus your business on your own skill set around podcasting?
It really came about because I had a friend who was a podcaster and kind of doing the whole sitting around drinking a few beers, talking about different business opportunities.
Dan Andrews.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna name drop there in a minute. Good old Dan Andrews, the host of the Tropical MBA podcast. And he was telling me how big of a pain doing all of their podcast post-production was. You know, he really enjoyed the recording part. He really enjoyed sharing the episodes, but all the editing, the show notes writing, all that kind of stuff, you know, he found to be a major pain in the ass, pardon my French. And he was having his team do it, but he wanted his team working on other things. So right then and there, I kind of made a handshake deal with him that I would help him out with his podcast. And at first I offered to do it for him for free, and he said no, because he said, you know, if you're not going to charge me for it, you're not going to take it seriously. So I slapped a price tag on it. And had my first client. So I started out as a podcast editing service because working with him, that kind of got my foot in the door. And Andrew has a pretty big audience. And at that time, it was much smaller, obviously, but he's got a pretty good following in the work from anywhere, you know, live and work on your laptop and kind of live the 4-hour work week type of an audience. So I got a few referrals pretty quickly from him directly because us working together, it made his life so much easier. He could have his team doing stuff that actually affected the bottom line, and we could handle all the podcast stuff. So as far as like how I position myself as the podcast guy, you know, I helped somebody who had a need and they also had an audience and were willing to refer people to me when I did a really good job for them. So when it comes down to it, that's quite literally how it got started.
Sounds like an awesome initial setup is help the person with a solid brand, and that's all the credibility you need. Although that is a relevant question is, did you run into that problem when you were first getting started, which is, cool, I'm interested in having your services. Can you point me to 3 previous clients who've accomplished X, Y, and Z from what you're doing? But you're like, oh no, I've only had one. I'm just getting started. Did you run into that problem at all?
Yeah. Very rarely will people ask for multiple references. I think I've had it, you know, maybe 3 times in my 2.5, 3 years of business. Usually, if people know that you have worked with one person that they know, if they come from a referral, they're not going to ask for other people. They already trust the person that's referring them. If they come to you cold, if they come to you blind, they've never heard of anybody that you've worked with before, that's when people will want to hear about, you know, other work that you've done. And in that case, it can be your one client, or it can be just people that you've helped out in that space. So you don't necessarily have had to have built their podcast and launched their show or done all their editing. Maybe you reviewed their show. This is just something that you took up upon yourself. You reviewed their show and noticed, hey, their iTunes listing kind of sucks. And I know a few ways that they can make that much more effective. And you shoot a little tutorial video for them, and even at the end say, hey, I'd be more than happy to do this for you completely free, and send it over to them. Because really what it comes down to is, who have you helped, and did they come out the other end better off than when they first interacted with you? That's really what people care about and want to know.
Absolutely. A lot of great advice there. And I think pulling all that out, it's very useful when you're trying to enter a new industry or maybe work on a different type of project within a given industry, you know, just, I guess, sort of emulating what you did, which is finding that one person that you can really help out, maybe even at a discount. And then from there, you have the leverage to work with just about anybody else.
Yeah, and I'll slide a little ninja trick in there. This is something that I learned from Brian Harris, the Video Fruit guy. I like a lot of his stuff because it's very like hustle oriented. It's not, he doesn't go for the easy route. He goes for like, how can I do it differently and stand out? So let's say you are starting a course or an online service or something, and you want to work with a particular type of people, and you don't have any clients yet, but you want to start getting some referrals or some testimonials from people that actually have clout, not just, your buddy Joe. What you can do is sign up for somebody's email list, like a person's email list. And usually that very first email that they send you, if you hit reply, they will either get it or it'll go to their personal assistant. So if you reply to that email with, what I just talked about, you review something that they've done or, based around your area where you can help people. That's what I've found as one of the easiest ways to connect people that actually have some influence. And obviously there's Twitter and other platforms as well, but that's a really easy way to get into people's inboxes without, trying to hunt down all of their info for eons.
Yeah, it's a really good point actually, because if you're trying to scout for somebody's email address, that might be quite hard to find something that kind of goes to them or at least close to them, like you said, the personal assistant. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're right. Usually the reply to address, or at least the displayed email address, is it's right there. So
exactly. And if it's a reply, man, they're at least gonna open the damn thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, then it's up to you to do something with it.
Exactly. So I also know that you have rebranded, you used to be Authority Engine, you rebranded to Cashflow Podcasting. What was the impetus behind that?
Yeah, so when we started out, we used the name Authority Engine because we were working with podcasters mostly, but I didn't really know if we were going to stick with just podcasting or if we were going to expand into other platform growth tools like blogging and video and different things like that. So we did video for a little while as well. But what I noticed is people started talking about me as like the podcast guy, like, hey, this is the dude that we use for our podcasting, talk to him. And the more I started doing other things, the more that started getting diluted. And I turned into like a content marketing agency that is, a dime a dozen, and there's a zillion of them out there. So I decided to really double down on the podcast front and really specialize in the fact that we help authorities and online experts grow their platforms using podcasting as a powerhouse tool. So now we're very specific on who we help and how we help them. So that way, all of our services, all of our courses, everything can be very streamlined. We can stay at the top of our game because I'm not trying to, keep up with 6 different marketing platforms. And it allows us to keep things really streamlined. Plus, as an added bonus, people immediately know what the heck we do when they hear of Cashflow Podcasting. When they hear of Authority Engine, it's a little bit more ambiguous. So now it's much easier when people kind of connect with us. They already have a good sense for what's going to happen.
Yeah, good stuff. And this is funny. This reminds me, it's very reminiscent of the when I had John McIntyre on here. We actually talked a lot about rebranding as well.
He was
doing the same thing.
Yep.
Small world.
Yep. And I feel like any entrepreneur is going to go through a few rebrands, especially if it's their first business or their one of their first few businesses. That's part of the game. You learn as you go, and you do the best you can with what you got, and as that changes, then you rebrand and you shift.
Yeah, it's funny. I think every one of my businesses has dramatically pivoted or totally rebranded since it began. And actually, I also had Danny Iny on. It was like a couple weeks ago. And so it's funny. He like his company is like multi-million-dollar size, and they're also rebranding after like 10 years. So it's really interesting to see how all of that works and what that can accomplish. And so it's actually cool. We're like 5 minutes in. We've already talked about like how to get started, how to get your first clients, how to prospect, about branding yourself. I also want to talk to you about skill acquisition. So when you first started working with Dan Andrews, I'm assuming you probably knew something about podcasting, but you were far from an expert because you were just getting started. So what was your process to go from, I guess, armchair podcaster to actually being the expert on that topic?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And also an area where I feel like people get held up quite a bit, because when I was talking to Dan, I had never edited a podcast before. I had listened to a bunch of them. I had no idea about the back end of podcasting. I really didn't even know what went into it, but I had done a little bit of video editing in high school, so I figured, well, how hard can it be? And maybe that was like a bite off more than you can chew, but essentially after we talked about it, then I just went and did a whole ton of research on, how to edit podcasts, editing softwares, what were the important pieces, what actually made the difference and what didn't matter. So really, it was kind of a trial by fire, but I also know that I'm relatively resourceful. I can figure things out pretty quickly, and I'm not a terribly tech savvy person. That's not really my strength, but one of my strengths is kind of like the I'll figure it out approach. So for kind of growing into becoming an expert in the podcasting space, number one, my first task was to figure out how the hell do I edit a podcast. So I learned that pretty quickly, at least the basics to get their first few episodes going. And obviously, as I did those, I got better and more comfortable with it. And then I started seeing how Dan was using the Tropical MBA, or what at that point was the Lifestyle Business Podcast. He went through a rebrand as well. How he was using that as a tool to grow a really vibrant, really engaged, really empowered community of individuals across the world, and for that to be a lead source for their online community, the Dynamite Circle. And that's when I got really kind of interested and hooked, because as much as I really enjoy podcasting as a marketing angle, that's really what it is. And what gets me excited about it is the fact that it is a marketing tool. So when I could apply, my passion and enjoyment of marketing and strategy to podcasting, that's when it really came together for me, and started working with other clients, started kind of getting more hands-on experience, launched my own podcast, obviously, and started doing a bunch of research around using podcasting as a marketing tool. And so it has literally just grown since then, sometimes in leaps and bounds, and sometimes, very incrementally, depending on who I'm working with and what kind of challenges they've got and what they need done. But I think really what it comes down to was knowing that as long as I can provide value to this person by knowing how to do it, better than they would themselves, then we're on the right path. And as long as I can continue to learn and grow, then I can serve my clients even better.
Great stuff. And this makes me think of something I was talking about, entrepreneurial optimism in a previous conversation. And basically we were talking about how a common trait of successful entrepreneurs is that I don't know how to do it, but I'll figure it out kind of mentality. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting also on the flip side of that is that what often happens with that mentality is that you sort of are overly optimistic. And so once you go through the experience, you're like, wow, I thought this was going to be way easier. I would never do this again. I'm glad I did. On to the next thing. But you always dramatically underestimate the work something takes in an optimistic way. And that's one of the reasons why you can do it. But the flip side is afterwards, you realize it was much more difficult. It's just an interesting sort of psychological flow of that kind of experience. And I think that's quite true with a lot of people's experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm no different.
And me as well. So when you started to go from, I guess low end, I'm assuming it was relatively low end, or at least not high end podcast editor, to more working on bigger projects, more premium clients, what was your approach to breaking into, I don't know if it was just a switch that you flipped where you started to really focus on bigger projects and working with people where you can accomplish more with them, or was it a gradual process? How did that look like in your business?
Yeah, it was quite literally flipping a switch. What I realized was at first we were not charging a whole lot for our podcast launch services. And at the time, there was no such thing as a podcast launch service. So I had no freaking clue how to price the dang thing. All I knew was what my costs were. And so I priced it based off of what my costs were, which, is kind of a classic newbie mistake. But because it was a low price, then we attracted people that were only attracted to kind of that lower end offer. And what I realized very quickly was those are the biggest pain in the butt clients usually. The people, and I'm not talking about from the editing side. I'm talking mostly from, when we would connect with people who are, they're already bloggers, they're already online, they've got a website, they've got influence, but they want to start using podcasting. We would help people get started with podcasting by kind of having a whole beginning to end done for you service. And at the beginning, it was pretty cheaply priced. So the people that we worked with, this was the only thing that they were working on. And even though it was priced very low, it was a lot of money for them to invest in getting a podcast going. They may or may not have had much cash flow in their business. And so everything for them was riding on this. So naturally, that's the only thing that they paid any attention to. And they would harbor in on tiny details that really didn't matter in the overall effectiveness of the podcast. So a launch process that was supposed to take 4 weeks would end up taking, 8, 10, 12 weeks because people would want 16 revisions of things. And it wasn't because we did a poor job. It was just because, they would want the little tiny thing, they'd want this text bolded and they'd want, can we take this little sound bite down a little bit and then bring it back up, all this kind of goofy stuff. And when I kind of eventually realized, okay, us working with kind of the lower end client is really killing us and it's really biting into our profit margins. It's really biting into our time and our ability to actually help these people get value. I realized the people that were better suited for podcasting in the first place, as well as to get the most from our service, were people that were already established business owners. They were already established online and they already had significant cash flow from a product or service. And we could then come in with podcasting and help them drive more interest, leads, prospects, and sales to what they've already got. So not only could we charge more, but we could provide a more valuable service. We could help them get a return on their investment so much more quickly because they've already got the tools there to make money from podcasting. So we weren't fighting this constant uphill battle. So it was a really easy decision once I kind of came to this realization. And quite honestly, we nearly tripled our prices overnight. And in doing so, number one, it scared off all the people that thought that was way too high of a price tag. And pretty much those are all the folks that aren't ready to use our service. But the folks that are ready to use our service, they then started seeing us as a much higher value offer, as a much higher value service, and began trusting us more, began kind of deferring to our judgment, as well as really, it's funny, when you charge more for a service, you get to serve better clients and they have a better experience. So it was an all around win. And I know, for some folks, especially if you're starting out, raising your prices is a little bit scary. But if you can serve a higher market better, if they're going to get more value from it, give it a shot. You probably won't go back.
People talk a lot about raising your prices, doubling your price, and that's actually everything you said I totally agree with. It's very consistent with my experience as well. But I guess the secondary element of that is double your prices and then ... So was there a big change in your sales process, either through your prospecting or how people became clients once you started targeting a more premium client?
Absolutely. So the major change, our prospecting process changed a little bit so that we would attract kind of the higher end folks. We had less people signing up for sales calls, mainly because I literally would warn people, when they would go to sign up for a consultation with us. This is a premium service that comes with a premium price tag, kind of like a little bit of a warning box there. And the funny thing though was it scared off the people that weren't ready for our service, that weren't a good fit for our service. So really, all it was making sure that people were a good fit before we even got on the phone, so that I wasn't spending every waking moment on sales calls with people who weren't qualified. And then as far as our sales process went, we did do a facelift to our marketing materials as far as, we've got product service sheets that include all the deliverables of our programs and the pricing and that kind of stuff. So we got that a little bit more cleanly branded. And I think that was more of I wanted to make the image of the company more professional. So we very much could have done just fine without doing that. But I wanted to kind of give the whole brand a facelift as far as how we came off as a brand and our professionalism. So the only change really was in the sales conversations. I would start the conversation by qualifying the fact that they actually had a cash flowing business, that they had revenue coming in the door. And if they didn't, then oftentimes right at that point, I would let them know what the price was and gauge their reaction so that if that was going to be a major factor, I could then advise them in a way that would be a better fit for them. Because that's really what they want. They're not there to talk about what your service package is. They're there because they want what's the next step forward for them that's going to help them get where they're trying to go. So if you can offer that, great. If you can refer them to somebody else that can help them better in their particular situation, that's even better. And if you've got, let's say, like a downsell offer, which now we do, until pretty recently, we just, only work with the higher end folks. But now we've got a course that essentially walks people through the exact system we use, but they can do it themselves. So now we can take folks to that if they're not ready for our launch services. And that's kind of the cake. So really, it's just kind of a shift in mindset of how do we, number one, attract that higher end client? What's the lead magnet? What's the, what is going to get them interested? And number two, how do we qualify these people to make sure that they are going to be the best prospects for what we have? And if they're not, where do we send them that is actually beneficial to them? We don't want to send anybody away with saying, hey, good luck. I want to give them a particular resource or a different service or a different tool that they can use to get where they're trying to go.
Great stuff, and a lot of important lessons learned. And I don't want to get too bogged down on just sales stuff, because I know you're the podcast guy, so we got to talk about podcasting. So if any of you guys are listening, want to learn more about sales stuff, go back to one of the earlier episodes towards the beginning with David Anderson. Lots of good sales stuff there, actually very consistent with what you're saying now. So I have one more question about the back-end business side of things. Before we dive into specific podcast tips, that is related to your team and fulfillment of the service. So I imagine when you got your very first client, you had to kind of just figure it out and do it yourself. And now I imagine you do very little or maybe none of the actual fulfillment yourself. You're just the business owner and manager, project manager, prospector, or sales call person, something like that. So what was the process? What was that timeline? How did that evolution happen in your business?
Yeah. So for the first about 6 to 8 months, we only did editing. We only did editing stuff, and I was the one that did all the editing stuff. And then that was over the time span where I learned more about Dan's business and how he was using podcasting as a marketing tool. And that's what got me excited about launching podcasts for people. So at that point, we brought on our first launch client, and I did that as well. Somewhere around there, I hired my first editor who started to help me with the audio editing and the show notes writing. But fast forward to now, let's see, this is about 2.5 to 3 years later. You're correct. I don't do any of the editing myself or show notes writing myself. I don't do any of the launches myself anymore. My main role is managing the team, training the team, and handling the sales end of things, which as a entrepreneur, that should be, your major focus 9 times out of 10, either selling or, working with people who are selling what you've got to offer. Because without that, the whole ship dries up. So the evolution really was me figuring out how the different things worked, how the strategies worked, how we wanted to approach podcasting as a strategy and how we could help people use it most effectively for generating sales, for growing their email lists, for building their influence online, all those kind of things. So I kind of figured out a lot of the stuff myself, and then working with my team, we would build out standard operating procedures for how all of our processes, all of our projects, and all of our offers worked. You know, what are the things that all of our clients would go through to get the result that they came here for. Granted, that's the long way to do it. And I've learned that for sure, is the whole figuring it out yourself and then, SOPing it out and training somebody else to do the standard operating procedure. That's the long way. What I've started to transition into, well, it's the long way, but it's the cheaper way. So if you are kind of bootstrapping, if this is your income source and you need to make sure that, you don't have any dry spells, that's the way to go. If you're looking to get up and running faster, if you're looking to, kind of really come onto the stage really quickly, and you're not so concerned if you may have a down month or two, then bringing on people that know a hell of a lot more about the topic area than you can be really beneficial, because they can teach you really quickly. They can set up the standard operating procedures with you. You can kind of work with them to discover what it is that you want, and they can apply their knowledge to how you want the whole thing to go. And then you've got all your kind of process or your back-end delivery system set up. So once you kind of have that system set up, you've got to have the people in place that can provide that for the client. They can work with the client. Obviously, this is for a done-for-you service, but the same thing applies to info products and courses. The same thing applies to customer service. So really, when it comes down to it, it's taken 2 years or a little over two years for me to not be doing the service anymore, and for me to actually be able to focus on the selling end. So it can take a while, especially, and with entrepreneurs, we've got this overly hopeful mindset, to where I thought for sure once I figured out the whole launch thing, I thought, okay, within 2 or 3 months, I'll have this figured out. I'll hire somebody, they'll be trained up and ready to go, and I can just sell, and then we'll be cruising. And it wasn't exactly how it played out.
2 to 3 months becoming 2 to 3 years sounds about right.
Yep, sounds about right.
But yeah, I'm sure. I don't know if it was a specific moment when you were like, "Wow, I don't have to fulfill the service anymore." But if it was, I can imagine you being like, "Yay! Finally! I'm so sick of freaking podcast editing and launching. Finally."
Yeah, I stopped listening to podcasts for a few months there, because I was towards the end of me doing all the podcast editing, because I had too much of it. I just couldn't handle it anymore. That was a glorious day when I brought on our first editor and they started taking over all the editing. Oh my gosh, that was beautiful.
I've actually found the same thing, even just hosting a podcast, is I actually listen to way fewer, because it's kind of like listening and interacting with like a podcast live, and it's like almost the same thing. But anyways, so let's dive into actual podcast strategy, because I know you've got, years of experience doing this. So I'd love to talk about some best practices of that. Sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Cool. So what are, I guess, a couple different reasons why somebody should look at podcasting as a way of growing their brand or their business?
Yeah, so what it really comes down to is podcasting is simply a communication and marketing channel. Just like blogging is a communication and marketing channel, just like Facebook ads, just like, so it is a channel. And what makes it effective and special, versus some of the other channels, is it allows you, so there's a few basics. Number one, it is content on demand. So people can listen to it whenever they want. It's not like old school radio or TV where you've got to show up at the right time to, hear that thing that you've been wanting to. Once it's published, people can access all of your past and previous episodes forever with the iPhone in their pocket or their smartphone in their pocket, which leads me to number two. It's mobile. People do not have to direct all of their attention to you in order to listen to podcasting. If they want to read your blog posts, if they want to watch your videos, they need to sit down and pay 100% attention to you. If they're listening to your podcast, they can be out walking their dog, they can be cooking dinner, they can be driving to work. So the beauty with this is not only is it more mobile, but you're not interrupting people's lifestyle, you're becoming part of their routine. So oftentimes if people are, if they've got a dog and they walk it every morning and they're out there and they get into the habit of listening to podcasts, boom, you are part of their, if not weekly, daily routine. And they are electing to check out what you've got to share. So you're not jumping in front of them like with advertising. You're not trying to, cut out a piece of their time or a piece of their attention. You're there as an additive, as a optional value that they can choose to partake in if they want. So those are three of the real meaty things. And then as there's of course many different things, but podcasting is really good at two other things. One is building your freaking network, and you've definitely seen this, Grant.
Oh yeah, so good. It's like the number one best way to network. I love it.
So easy. And of course, in doing so, it also immediately elevates your authority level. It's kind of like saying you're an author. I'm a podcast host. And especially if you are in a market where a lot of your audience is offline, they're not constantly online in online communities and chats and forums and stuff. If they are in an offline space, they view, podcasting as, oh, you're a radio show host? Like it knocks people's doors off. But the final thing is, as a sales tool, it's really effective for two reasons. One, it allows you to build social proof without being a show off. So it allows you to talk about your expertise. It allows you to talk about and share things that that your audience can really benefit from, as well as share stories, share experiences, share updates of people that you've worked with that are seeing results. And it doesn't have to be, somebody tripled their sales overnight because they had a 5-minute conversation with me. It can literally be, hey, just want to give a quick shout out to John. We had a chat last week on the phone and he just emailed me today telling me that he's reached out to 3 new potential leads since our conversation. So, congrats, John. But what it does is it builds this really powerful social proof around you and the fact that the people that are working with you, the people that are connecting with you, are moving forward, they're seeing progress, and they're seeing results. And the final thing is, sorry, you get me talking on this.
Yeah, keep going. It's good stuff.
You get me all excited. The final thing is podcasting is the perfect, I call it client lifecycle tool. So we all know that, especially if you're in a service business, if somebody comes to you, they could be the very best prospect possible for what you've got to offer. They just aren't ready to move forward right now. Any sales, anything that you're selling will have this, to where only about 30% of the people that are perfect prospects are ready to move forward right now. The rest of that 70%, they're interested in what you've got, but right now is not good because they've got family stuff going on, or they're working on other projects and this isn't a priority for them. For whatever reason, they don't have the cash flow this month, but next month they're going to be good to go. Well, a lot of times in sales cycles, we sell to that 30% and the 70% just float off into the abyss, and that opportunity is lost forever. They may join our email list, but because we don't, constantly give them valuable things, they don't really stick around and they don't pay attention. With podcasting, if somebody comes to you, they're a good prospect, you can attract them into your podcast with really relevant and helpful content, and you can actually literally help them get to a point where they are ready to move forward through your content, through the advice that you're sharing, through the social proof that they're seeing on the show, and the trust and the connection that you're building with them. So that's really kind of, I feel like I started off on this rant like 10 minutes ago, but when it comes down to it, that is what podcasting is really good at when it comes to business growth.
You bring up an interesting point with the life cycle thing. That's actually not something I had really thought about in terms of the sales cycle, but I can totally see that being the case. And actually, in retrospect, that does seem to be true. And it's interesting. So to give, I guess, my personal opinion, I very much like podcasting for many of the reasons that you mentioned. And I do think it's very, very intimate. There's something about hearing somebody's voice that feels so much more intimate than reading a blog post. Like, there are certain blogs that I've read enough of them that I feel pretty like close or like familiar with the author, but I'd still feel weird if I met them in person. But then there's the podcast that I listen to where it's like I know their voice so well and I feel like I've known them, I feel like I've talked to them. It's just very, very intimate, pretty much unlike anything else, even video in a way. I think there's something that's more intimate about the voice thing that's like it's like right there in your ear, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And I can definitely say one of the biggest things that I hear from my clients, and this is kind of funny, is when they go to a conference in their market, you know, whether they were an expert before or not, whether they were, you know, well known before or not, they'll get people coming up to them and talking to them as if they've been best friends for a long time. And it's kind of creepy from the podcaster's standpoint at first, because you don't really understand what's going on. But once you realize, they're like, oh yeah, you know, I've listened to all your podcasts, love, you know, your content and how you know, share this or that with us. But it's funny, you know, it breaks down that barrier and people are really excited to talk to you on a friend level, not, you know, standing from across the room, you know, hoping that you'll sign their little notebook and feeling intimidated to come talk to you. Really, it breaks down that barrier so that people are really excited to come talk to you and connect with you as a person because they feel like they already know you as a person.
Yeah, a lot of really, really good points. And another thing I'll add in terms of a benefit from a podcast host perspective, when I bring people on for interviews, because I do 50-50 interviews and also topical episodes. When I bring people on for interviews, it's, you know, people from a variety of industries. They all have their own skill set, their own life stories. It's always very interesting to listen to those and the lessons that they've learned. You know, I always try and get some concrete tips for things and definitely for the audience, but I always write down at least a couple things. It's like, oh, that's a golden nugget. Like, oh, that's really interesting for me. Like, you know, part of the fun for me for interviewing is, you know, asking you and all of my other guests questions that I would just legitimately be asking you in everyday life. And it's cool because everybody else can hear the answer as well. So it's a great opportunity for learning as well and getting like these free mastermind calls almost.
Yeah, definitely. And when your best interest is your audience's best interest, that's when there's some really good synergy because you're going to ask the questions that your audience is dying to know as well.
Exactly. The incentives are perfectly aligned. So let's talk about the, I guess, fit between business models and podcasting. Because I'm sure, you know, if somebody's trying to hustle, like they just graduated high school and they're trying to do something entrepreneurial, probably not the best person to be the host of a podcast. So what's your thought about the types of businesses or the types of people who might be interested in exploring podcasting as a marketing channel?
Yeah, so when it comes down to it, podcasting is great for building, connecting with, and developing a community around you, your expertise, and your brand. However, who it's best suited for from a business and monetization standpoint is folks that either have a what I found is there's a pretty good cutoff around the $1,000 customer lifetime value mark. So if you sell, let's say, $100 info product, podcasting will be okay. It'll definitely help, but it's not going to be the greatest tool. If you have a $17 ebook, you're going to have to build a massive freaking audience to actually generate the kind of income that you want to through podcasting. If you, let's say, have a $200 a month program that people can join and people stick around for a year, then one sale is, you know, worth a little over $1,000 to you. You can see that as we shift more to the higher client lifetime value range, you don't need a very big podcast audience. You really don't need a very big audience to start doing 6 and 7 figures through a podcast when the lifetime value starts climbing, especially because as the client lifetime value climbs, people will need to trust you more before they'll start to work with you. And that's where podcasting really excels. So client lifetime value is one indicator that I've found. Another indicator that I have found that is very clear is whether or not your target audience or your target prospects already congregate online. And I mean this like, are there already, Facebook groups around that specific topic? Are there already LinkedIn groups? Are there specific forums where people chat about that kind of stuff? The more that people are, grouped up online, the more receptive they will be to a podcast, not only because they're tech savvy, but also because they're going online, literally seeking other people to be in a community of like-minded people, which is exactly what podcasting allows you to do, is create a community like that for folks. So those are two of the really big ones. And the final one is more for you as a person, whether or not you can be a good host. A lot of people have this misconception that, I don't have a radio voice. I don't like my voice. I didn't like my voice for the longest time. And I feel like most podcasters will probably say the same. But what's important is what I found is I'm not a very compelling writer. I can if I'm backed into a corner, but I don't get excited about it. I would rather talk about a particular topic. So here's the test that I use. Would you rather talk with a friend about something, or would you rather write them an email if they, lived in the same town as you? Would you pick up the phone and give them a shout? Or are you more the write an email type? Because it really makes a difference how your preferred communication style is, how you best share your thoughts and experiences. Because if you are a writer, blogging might be the better option for you. If you're a better talker, podcasting is probably going to be the better option for you, because I can definitely say that it takes a hell of a lot less time to record a podcast than it does to write a good blog post.
Absolutely. A lot of amazing points. And I want to jump in and add a couple things that I think apply to that as well. For example, I like writing, but I also like doing podcasting. So actually podcasting is kind of my shortcut to not having to write quite as much, because I like it, but not like enough to have multiple blog posts per week, which that's really hard. So much time. So it's a pretty good shortcut for that. And it connects very, very well with a blog. That way you can bounce back and forth between topics in writing, topics in interviews, things like that.
Definitely.
And one other thing that I'd like to add in as well, you're talking about how the price point of your product relating back to essentially what we're talking about is the type of sales channel to use based on the average revenue per customer, which is actually a very good breakdown to do for any type of marketing channel, because obviously you can't run profitable Facebook ads to most $5 ebooks. The math just doesn't work. And so if you calculate the cost of your time and what goes into producing a podcast, and you divide that out by the number of sales, if you have a $5 ebook, again, probably not going to work out in your favor if you factor in your time. But what I will say is I think podcasting can also be really great if you are, as we mentioned earlier, talking about sort of breaking into the next level of your offering. So if you're maybe not trying to go from $5 to a several $1,000 client, but maybe a $200 info product, trying to get into a several $1,000 coaching client type area, I think it can be very good for the networking, the connections, the branding, the refining of your message, the building of the community. I think it's fantastic for all of those things. And so it can be very, very essential for anybody who's listening who might have a lower value offering that's not well suited to it now. But if you're looking to move that offering up the value ladder, might be a really good option for you.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up, Grant, because that's absolutely true. I found podcasting is a really good fit for those folks who already kind of have that offer detailed out, as well as the people who know the audience that they want to serve. And generally, they've got a few ideas for how they might serve them. And they know that, okay, it isn't going to be a $17 ebook. It's going to be, either like, $500 info product, or it's going to be like a monthly recurring service or something like that. Podcasting is a great way to build that initial audience so that you can then get feedback directly from them on what your product, service, or offering should be. So that way you're not creating it and then going out and trying to sell it. You're actually getting very clear on the need and creating your offer for that need. So you've already got pretty much a guaranteed buyer base right off the get-go.
Absolutely. And honestly, there's a lot of similarities between what you're mentioning, the value of a podcast to validate an idea. You can also even sort of pull in people from other people's audiences. Like if you're interviewing somebody with 1 million Facebook followers and they share that you just interviewed them, well, of course, you're going to get a lot of email opt-ins. You're going to get a lot of new listeners. So there's a lot of similarities actually to that approach in order to launch a new product or new service, and also just a general product launch, right? Where you're putting out content, you're seeing how people react, you're refining your message in order to then turn that into a product. So really, really good stuff. So I've got just 3 final questions for you as we wrap this up. 1 more about podcasting and 2 personal questions. So don't sweat it too much. They're not, well, one might be a little bit comfortable, depends on your opinion, but I like to ask it and it always goes somewhere very interesting. So, for the final podcast question, what are some common elements of mistakes that people make with podcasting and or common elements of successful podcasts that you've seen?
Yeah, common mistakes I see. One is kind of a classic of starting any new project. It's when folks do like the 6 to 8 month research curve to where they don't actually do much other than find some blog posts and, read some blog posts. And they talk about this podcast concept or this idea that they're launching a podcast, but they're not going to freaking do it for 6 to 8 months. Here's my very straightforward advice is get clear on whether or not podcasting is for you and whether or not you want to move forward with it. And if you do, cool, do the necessary research to get something out quickly. If not, then drop it. Stop, doing the like quasi Google, article reading research and invest your time into something that's going to actually move your business forward instead of bookmarking all of these, articles about podcasting. So that's one. I see the tech side of things holding people up a lot. People will essentially delay launching a podcast for 3 months because they're debating which freaking microphone they should get. And I'll put an end to that. Get a cheap microphone that plugs into your laptop USB style. I use the Audio-Technica ATR 2100. And there's, if you're doing a Skype call, there's 2 recording softwares you can use really easily. If you're just doing stuff on your own laptop, you can use Audacity absolutely free. So the tech thing does not have to be a big thing. You don't have to look like a studio. I'm literally standing here with my laptop on the dresser and my little mic on a tripod right next to it. So you don't need a massive setup.
Let me jump in and ask, so the microphone you use, that's like the $30 one, right?
It used to be $30. I think they figured out how good it was, so now it's $60. So
really, they raised the price. Still, that's crazy. But yeah.
It's. I mean, you can get started for under $100 very easily.
So you guys are listening now. Listen to the difference in the audio quality between our 2 voices. So he's using a microphone that used to be 30 and I guess now is 60. Sounds really good. I'm using a microphone that was like 130 or something because I was stupid and I bought it and I thought it would be better. And honestly, it's like marginally better, but you don't have to go high end with this stuff. Like this sounds pretty good, but like he's saying, you can go with the medium low end microphones and it's definitely sufficient. So I just wanted to lend my 2 cents there.
Yep. And I do it to prove a point so that people don't feel intimidated by, I don't have to have a mixing board and a Hale PR40 and, I don't have to have a bunch of foam around me so that I look like I'm in a freaking recording booth. I'm literally standing here in my bedroom with my laptop on my dresser and my microphone on a tripod right next to it. So
great stuff.
That's all it takes.
Awesome. So to start off the personal 2 questions here, I'll ask the easier one first. So how would you start over from scratch?
Ooh, get me warmed up. Okay.
Yeah.
How would I start off from scratch? I would think about first an audience that I would be excited to work with. What's a market that I would be excited to go into? Who on a daily basis would I be excited to answer emails for? If they're sending me support emails or something. And I would just start engaging in those communities online, whether they're Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, something like that. Just going there, connecting with those people and talking with them. And I think the next step would be starting to get an idea for what kind of offers you could make in that space and trying to get a very clear understanding of what are the challenges and problems people are having in that space. And you can only do it by talking to people. Guessing will not work. So that's what I would do to start out. Because if you don't care about the people that you're serving in the end anyways, your excitement's not going to be there. You're going to lose enthusiasm and you're going to, in a couple months, scrap it and then start on a different project. So you might as well be committed to that audience first and then find a core problem that they've got that you can help them with, whether that's through, coaching or consulting or a service or a course, whatever it may be. I think it's generally a race to figure out what is the problem that people have that they want solved and how can you solve it best.
Great answer. And I like the angle that you took with working with the market that you'd actually enjoy talking to. Yeah. That's an interesting point, which I think actually, I ask people some form of this question in a lot of interviews, but that's actually one I don't think anybody else has brought up. But it is actually really important for not just it may or may not directly relate to the success of your business, but your day-to-day enjoyment, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're not like the masochistic, I'm driven regardless of what happens, definitely, make sure that the people that you're working with are people that you're excited to work with in the first place.
Absolutely. Okay, so now for the doozy. It's actually not that big of a deal, but we built it up, might as well be a doozy. So when was the time that you felt like a failure? And what did you learn from that experience?
Ooh, baby.
Don't sweat too much.
I already am. It's too late. So probably the biggest one of the first launch clients I had, we went through the whole launch process. We got him out there, and this was a really good learning curve thing for me. Was I literally did everything in my power to make his podcast a success, but I couldn't promote it on his end. I couldn't, do some of the necessary things for it to get traction. Like we literally wrote an email that he could copy and paste and send to his own list, but he didn't even do that. So the client didn't promote the podcast, and so then he essentially got pretty peeved with me and us as a service or us as a brand for his show not being a success or not, taking off like he had envisioned. And I understand his frustration, and it was like the first time that I had somebody that worked with us that wasn't absolutely tickled with what we had done for him. So, after I kind of pulled my head out of my own rear, I realized that, some people are simply not going to do the things necessary to see success. And that's one of the things that I started looking for when doing our sales conversations, is trying to see, okay, what progress have they made so far? Because that's going to be a darn good indicator of what kind of effort they're going to be willing to put into promoting this podcast when it goes live. If they, have been talking about putting together a website for 6 months and it's still, it's still not up, they're going to suck as a client. And no matter what we do for them, they're not going to do the necessary things to actually make this thing succeed. Whereas, if they're the type of person that takes things into their own hands and gets shit done, they're wonderfully suited, because we'll set them up, we'll tee them up, we'll give them the absolute best chance for success, and we'll give them all the tools, and all they got to do is copy, paste, and send, and they'll be good to go. So that one may not sound like it's terribly drastic, but it was a real hit to my ego, because I had never had a negative interaction with a client to that point. So yeah, I took it very personally, and I was all, wondering whether or not we could actually do this whole podcast service thing. And but I got over myself.
Yeah, I'm really actually glad that you chose that story to share, because I think with a lot of different types of services, it's lends itself, if it's at all to do with marketing or a marketing channel, clients or prospects always ask, okay, well, what kind of ROI should I get? What's my revenue going to be? There's always some kind of like, okay, well, what's the outcome? And of course, you very rarely have full control over all of the variables which lead to that outcome. And so, in some cases, one of those variables, which might be on the client side of things, might be a totally random, uncontrollable variable, will impede your ability to achieve a certain outcome. And then, of course, the client blames you. And in some cases, if you work with enough clients, that's eventually inevitable. And I definitely agree. I empathize with you. I think that is a good characteristic of an experience of failure, because if you do try and do a good job for your clients, it can really hit your ego hard. It can make you feel bad about what you're trying to do. But at the end of the day, you just don't have control over all of the variables for those kind of services.
Yeah, one of the quotes that I think I found more recently that sums this up perfectly is, you are responsible to the client, you are not responsible for the client. So you're responsible to them in that you will deliver everything that you've said that you will deliver, and that you will set them up for success as best as possible. But I'm not responsible for wagging my finger at them and, hounding them to send an email to their list or to do that kind of stuff. I'll set them up as best as possible for it, but I have no control over their personal decisions. So, my responsibility shouldn't fall into trying to enforce them to do something that they're not going to do anyways.
Good stuff. I've never heard that one before, but I really like it.
It's a David Nagel special.
Okay, good stuff. Actually, I lied. I have one more quick question that I was thinking of while you were talking, which is, are most of your current clients that you work with nowadays, is it mostly from outbound or inbound marketing?
Mostly from doing podcast interviews like this on other people's shows. And they'll hear me talking about podcasting, about how to use it effectively, and they'll hunt us down. So it's either from that or from referrals 9 times out of 10. So inbound for the most part, unless you count referrals as outbound.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I was actually kind of expecting outbound because, of course, you don't really have full control over the level of the clients or the prospects that are coming to you with inbound. So if you're trying to go high end, then that's interesting. Yeah, that's not what I would have expected. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of these value bombs about sales and getting started and podcasting and how people can get started podcasting, how they can leverage it in their business. And I know you got something special for people who are interested in learning more.
Yeah.
So where can people go to find more about that?
Yeah, first, Grant, this has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed connecting with you and sharing what I know. Hopefully, if you're listening, this has been really helpful, and you've at least come away with 1 or 2 things that have made you think a new thought, or help with direction in a particular area. One of the things that, obviously being a podcast expert, I get a ton of podcast questions, and generally it kind of boils down to the same 7 to 10 questions that are important, people need to know. But instead of, answering people's questions one by one, I actually put together a 10 video mini course. You guys can grab it absolutely free. I'll put it up at, cashflowpodcasting/grant or cashflowpodcasting.com/grant. I'll set up a little, page. You guys can grab it there. But it's got a 3-minute yes or no test of, should I be podcasting in the first place? This really ties back into, our conversation before of make a decision and either, move forward with podcasting or move on with something else. Use your time more wisely. And, I talk about the tech stuff that people can use. I talk about how to use podcasting as a sales tool. So it really addresses the major questions that people should have an answer to before podcasting. So that's going to be the best way to connect with me. And if you grab those, just hit reply to one of those emails if you've got a question that I don't address directly, and I'll shoot you a response.
You're suggesting people use your own method that you just referenced.
Hell yeah.
Well, guys, you heard it from Mr. Podcast himself. If you want to make the decision about using podcasting in your own business, go to cashflowpodcasting.com/grant and take his free mini course and learn more about podcasting, and it'll help you make the yes/no decision about this marketing channel. Thanks so much for all of the awesome information that you've shared today, Ben.
This has been a lot of fun. Really enjoyed being here. Thank you, Grant.
Hey entrepreneurs and experts, I just wanted to thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you learned at least one new big idea that helps you evolve your skills and gets you closer to monetizing your expertise and creating that successful knowledge business. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on iTunes and Stitcher, and check out myepodcast.com for all episodes as well as the tips and tricks mentioned in this episode. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.